Afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming out today. I'm Ed Osborne, Associate Professor of Visual Art and Music here at Brown. It's my great pleasure to welcome Clare Pentecost for this lecture today. Before we get to that, I'd also like to thank Heather, Darcy Badarni, Olanda Estrada, Christine Dodd, and Winnie Geyer, who helped with all the practical stuff of getting this thing to happen. They all work really hard, and we just love them for it every single day. So thanks to you guys, yay. Also, thanks to the Visual Art Department for supporting this entire event, and to Claire for making the long trip from Chicago to be with us. We'll have her talk first, which is 45-ish minutes and change, and then a question and answer period afterwards, so be ready with the questions. You'll probably have lots of them. During that time, we will have microphones. We're recording this event, so there'll be microphones circulating, so when you do have a question, wait for the mic to show up to you. We'll have people passing them around. So I wanted to give a little bit of background before the lecture for this. So we're very fortunate to have with us today Clare Pentecost, an artist, activist, writer, and public amateur. Pentecost's work is a form of creative research that employs many strategies of engagement, collaboration, teaching, fieldwork, writing, lecturing, drawing, installation, and photography. That list, while accurate, conveys little of the nature of her practice. I tried to find a way in which to summarize her work here for this introduction, something which, as you will shortly see, is a rather futile task. So rather than try and fail at this, I'll let someone else try and mostly not fail at it. Writing in Art 21 magazine, Tom Donovan noted that since the late 90s, Pentecost has sought to use art to politicize and create public knowledge around the production, distribution, and consumption of food. This long-term research project engages what Pentecost calls the public amateur, whereby artists inhabit the positions of amateurs and hobbyists in order to make visible our everyday relationships with techno-scientific processes. The advantage of the amateur for Pentecost and others is that one can enter specialized discourses in order to both reveal how those discourses function, that is, to demystify them, and to empower others to think about how science and technology function in their daily lives and in the public sphere at large. What's more, since the amateur is not inside the discourses of technoscience, but rather an intruder into those forms of knowledge production, they may possibly see more clearly a series of relationships between corporations, public and private institutions, governmental agencies, and the everyday practices of consumers, producers, and citizens. I first met Clare in the early 90s at a residency at the Banff Center in Canada. Though I can safely say that I recalled nothing of the specifics of what she was working on there, I do remember quite well her lucid engagement with those around her, as well as her steady sense of inquiry about pretty much everything. Among the questions she posed then were, what were dreams like before the advent of motion pictures? What happens when it's not possible to get lost? How much of an agent should you be in your own life? Later, I came to understand that these kinds of questions not only inform her work and the discourse around it, they are at the heart of it. What are the conditions of optimism? If all attachment is optimistic, does it follow that attachment is a condition of optimism? If so, what are we attached to? The practice of art is sometimes described as a method of navigation, and questions like these both reveal areas of inquiry and indicate paths to navigate through them. They contain insights that are so simple and clear that once posed make you wonder about the number of other points of simple clarity that are scattered unobserved around you. Her work and the questions it asks reveals a close and perceptive attention to the currents of contemporary culture, the nature of living unnaturally, and the conditions of the Anthropocene. In other words, pretty much everything. Pentecost has exhibited her work at dOCUMENTA, the Istanbul Biennial, Whitechapel in London, the third Mongolian Land Art Biennial, I really want to see that, the Corcoran Museum, and many other places. She is professor and chair of photography at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and holds degrees from Smith College and the Pratt Institute. Please join me in welcoming Clare Pentecost to Brown University.
Well, I think we should just stop there because that was really the nicest. I'm gonna cry. It's a great way to start a talk. Andrea Fraser does. Yeah. She does it all the time. Anyway, now, perception. we're going to talk about, I think perception is actually political, and I have broken it down just to these two parts, investigation and expression. And I actually believe that as we perceive, we are expressing, and that actually reality expresses itself. Nature is expressive, and we are reading the signs all the time. And that as we perceive, especially collectively, and we share information about what we are perceiving, it becomes an expressive mode. So I like to start with this quote. Sorry, it also makes me cry. This is by John Cage, and in an interview he said, it wasn't a question of communication or something to be understood, talking about his work with chance operations, but it was a question of changing our minds. I don't know why I'm so emotional today. It's really crazy. So it will be an unforgettable talk, right? Because I'll keep choking up about the fact of being alive. So I think this just really speaks to me, because I think that what we're tasked to do in this life is to really study our moment. And we live in an extraordinary time. This is like a time of self-reflection for the human species, probably like none other, because of what we've wrought. Yeah, there we go. I had to write it up there so that I wouldn't forget to say it. So you've already heard a little bit about the public amateur. I don't think I really need to explain it more than Ed did so beautifully. But I think that knowledge itself, knowledge production, who authorizes it, who gets to interpret it, should be on the table. And this is something an artist can do. An artist can perform learning, can learn in public, so that the conditions of knowledge production are there to be part of the conversation, right? So it's a kind of self-consciousness. This is me giving a workshop in soil biology, which I've studied with a lot of help and on my own recognizance. And this is a quote by Edward Said on the amateur. And he's talking about, in his book on the reflections of the intellectual, he talks about the intellectual as an amateur. And let me just jump to the next paragraph. The intellectual spirit as an amateur can enter and transform the merely professional routine most of us go through into something much more lively and radical. Instead of doing what one's supposed to do, one can ask why one does it, who benefits from it, how can it reconnect with, and I can't even remember what Ed said, what he said in that quote, but I like to connect it with the fact of being alive. So as Ed mentioned, I spent years researching the industrial food system, and I'm not really going to talk about that so much because I'm kind of restless and I've moved into other things. But this photograph I took at an agricultural trade fair in Argentina kind of sums up a lot of it, because this is a machine that's actually a killing machine. It sprays pesticides, it applies synthetic fertilizer, which destroys the natural soil biology. It's fossil fuel driven, like all of our agriculture, except organic, except industrial organic. It always gets complicated. And in the economy of it, there are these things called externalities. So in economics, when they're doing the calculating costs and profits, they don't add in a lot of the unintended consequences of some of our practices. So for instance, This is a map showing the application of synthetic fertilizer. And the darkest part is where the most is applied. But all over our farming lands, it's applied heavily, and it goes down the river. It gets into our water table, and in that second screen there, you can see that there's a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico because there's so much nitrogen that it feeds too fast these like microorganisms and algae, which use up all the oxygen, and then nothing else can live. So it's a hypoxic zone. Another externality is, this is in the animal husbandry, as it's called. And what you're looking at is an aerial view. These squares up here are feedlots, and those little dots are cows. And what this lurid, beautiful bloom over on the left side or the right side is their waste. So that's a manure lagoon. And as Wendell Berry says, we took a solution, which is to raise your animals where you grow your crops, and then you use the manure to fertilize, right? And you don't have to use synthetic fertilizer. But Wendell Berry says we took a solution and created two problems out of it. So we separated the animals, and their manure is a problem, and then to fertilize our soil, we need to use synthetic fertilizer. I got sick of the industrial food system after several years and started studying other ways to raise our food. And so if you're interested in growing food without toxins and synthetics, you have to take care of your soil. And it's all about the biology in the soil. Like, so what is soil? It's actually a mixture of sand, silt, and clay, which refers to particle size, inhabited by a whole cosmos of microscopic living organisms, which are set up relationships between each other and the plants. And let me go back a minute. What you're looking at here is a kind of crude diagram of who eats whom. And so the processing of nutrients through the life cycle, and then in the end, when plants and animals die, they're taken apart again by microbes so that those nutrients are available again. And it's an amazing system. It's a trophic cascade. Now, in this diagram of soil, you'll notice there's a lot of space in between the particles where all the little creatures are living. Well, that's what we call structure. And it's a very important part of soil because the structure is how you have oxygen circulating and water circulating and the nutrients. So this is a picture I took in my microscope. So you're seeing some of the friendly creatures in a soil sample. And one of the cool things is that you see those kind of amber blobs? Those are bacteria, microaggregates of bacteria. So they clump together and they create the structure. I used to think it was just like sand, silt, and clay. And, you know, if your soil was clayey, you had to add sand. It was all particles. But it's the biology that creates the structure. We also have mycorrhizal fungi. And the fungus transports nutrients and makes them available to plants as needed. So the plant's in control. They also communicate between trees and other plants. They actually send messages. So this is my little GIF. It's a little, because when I'm looking in the microscope, it's moving, it's still alive. It's a soil sample, it's one drop of water with soil in it, sandwiched between two pieces of glass. And so you say, why don't I make video? Well, I did make a video, and here it is, but we can't play it because for some reason we couldn't get the technology to work. But it was going to be a nematode, which is a beautiful little little worm thing, but it's really tiny, and there are thousands of kinds of them. There are people who only study nematodes. Most of them are good, okay? They eat bacteria, and their poop is a very nutritious thing for other microorganisms. This is a really cool thing. This is a drawing I made for a later project, but that is a root-eating nematode, because there are some bad nematodes, and they eat roots of plants. But look at this. The fungus is trapping the nematode so that it can't do its dirty work on the plant root. It wraps around it and blows up these kind of balloons so that the nematode is paralyzed. Amazing. This is a tardigrade, the water bear, which some of you may have heard of. This is something I don't know. Stalked ciliate. This is like, it's just looking in a microscope, you just see really cool stuff. It's like being a kid, finding cool stuff. So, and if you study microbes, you realize that we are microbes. We share these microbes with healthy soil. In fact, in a typical human, there's 100 times more DNA of the microbes that live in and on your body than DNA that's properly human. So, like when they cracked the genetic code for humans, and they found out we have like 23,000 genes, they were really disappointed, because they thought, oh, we're so complex, we should have the most genes. But they weren't counting all the genes in the microbes that help us function. And they do more than just help us digest. They actually teach the immune system to regulate itself. So that's a whole long story that I'm not going to talk about because I don't have time. Okay, so when you're a research-oriented artist, the big question is form. How are you going to put it in a form that can be recognized or experienced as art? And I think that one of the possible roles for an artist is to organize a situation in which knowledge can become a shareable sensation. So it can be felt rather than parsed in a rational way, which actually, you know, if you've been reading neuroscience, you know that we're not actually very rational at all, but we'd like to think we are. So the great thing about taking care of your soil is compost, right? So I did this project where I started with my kitchen waste, and I was going to make compost from them, which is just oxygenated decomposition. But in this case, I made a big 5-foot by 9-foot worm bed, because I have worms helping me compost. And I put in there a cotton American flag. So I composted the American flag. And this is the piece, which I call the proposal for a new American agriculture. Because that industrial system I was telling you about very briefly is the American system, and it's been exported all over the world. And the externalities were great soil for my garden. I had a gardener living with me that year, so it's a beautiful garden. And here's another piece I did about soil, in which I proposed soil as a unit of value, suggesting that we could have an economy based on something that's actually useful for life, instead of something like gold, which of course it hasn't been based on gold since the 60s or the 70s when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. But I was thinking, what happens? It was just a thought experiment. What happens when you base an economy, which is all about abstraction, right, on something very material? Because I'm interested, just as in the last project, I'm interested in materializing the sign. Those abstract things, how can we experience them materially? this is something an artist can do. So I made these forms that are like ingots, like gold bars, but I made them of soil, and I displayed them on top of a gold panel because I wanted it to be legible, and people would walk in and they see the gold, they see the soil, but the gold's on the bottom, and the soil is the thing of value. Then I made these currency notes, and instead of our presidents or such as that, I put some of the pioneers of organic agriculture. This is J.R. Rhodale, who started the Rhodale Institute, a very early adapter of organic agriculture. And I dipped the drawings in soil so that, actually, when people are sick of looking at this, it can all be composted. There's nothing toxic in it. And then I did also drawings of people who've contributed to the understanding of the human as part of a larger ecology. So, of course, I have Darwin, and I have this quote by Darwin in his book on earthworms, which was his last monograph. He says in the first paragraph, he says, "For those of you not interested in small agencies," what's it say? "And their accumulated effects, you were not going to be interested in this book." And that little idea, small agencies and their accumulated effects, is very inspiring to me because I think that's how change happens. And we have to make ourselves agents. And we may feel small sometimes, but it's all about working collectively and the accumulated effects. And then I have down here Donna Haraway, who has talked about companion species. Lynn Margulis down on the corner there, who established that morphogenesis, the development of new species, was not through competition, but through symbiosis. And I really recommend reading Lynn Margulis if you want to have your mind turned around about evolution. And she has really been, she's been vindicated. She also works with James Lovelock on the Gaia theory, which we can talk about if you want to. These are more, then I added creatures from the soil food web on my soil erg currency notes. That down there in the corner is the tardigrade. But that's how it looks in my microscope, and that's how it looks in an electron scanning microscope. It's pretty winning.
What do you call it?
A tardigrade. Yes. And these are a couple of art jokes that I added. You may recognize over here, it's a famous picture of Joseph Beuys with a coyote in the gallery. But I put a soil microarthropod that he's conferring with. And this is Anna Mendieta, who buried herself and was very much about reorganizing a relationship to the earth. And right when I was making this, Warren Buffett, the kind of investment guru of America, said, "I will guarantee you that farmland over 100 years is going to beat gold as an investment," which it's beating it now in something called land grabbing. Anyway, this is Vandana Shiva, Indian activist, food justice activist, and environmental. And there she is. She came to my show, and she's being photographed in front of her drawing. So in the back, I had these two cabinets. One I borrowed from the Museum of Natural History in Kassel, and this is a really curious object from around 1790. It's a teaching object, and what it is a cabinet, And you open it up and you see layers of rock, okay? So this is about discovering the strata of geological deposits. And why did they discover that? Because they were mining. And these rocks were cut by miners. That really dark band down at the bottom is copper ore. And I wanted to include this because, as I will get to a little more later, geology and mining and extraction have been hand in hand through the history of that branch of the sciences. And one of the things I'm working on now is talking to scientists about the way they have contributed, the way Western science has contributed to the mess we're in now. Now, I'll get to that in a minute, but I had a replica made of this cabinet, and inside was a worm bin. So this is someone feeding the worms, because this one I thought represented the age of extraction, and this represented an age of restoration. And you see that woman there, she's holding an earphones. Is that what they're called? Earphones, right. Because we recorded the sound of the worms. Because the worms will run from the light, so you wouldn't be able to see them. But you could hear them. And they make this little munching noise. I would play it, but you would never be able to hear it. But you could hear it with earphones. And outside, we had these growing towers because, okay, you can make soil, right? But what if you don't have enough space to grow your food? So I collaborated with the Can You Love Foundation, a guy named Ben Fritton, who's designing these small footprint growing systems. And this is the same columns in 6 weeks. And it's all food. So we made a lot of these over the years. And ours always look a lot more scruffy than those prototypes. I don't know why that is. We were experimenting. We're always experimenting, right? And we had them outside of buildings and in community gardens, etc. Jumping forward, this summer I was invited to do something about compost at a museum in Italy. And I decided to make a workshop with teenagers. So we would study compost, but we would try to understand it through the body. So throughout the workshop, we were doing improvisation and exercises with the body. We would study something, and then they would come up with little kind of movement skits. It was really beautiful. And we did a lot of exercises like to generate thought and to absorb the knowledge as a group. I have, let's see, what time is it? I was just going to show you, there's a video. What they did was they had documentarians that were young video artists. It was a parallel workshop where these young video artists were documenting our workshop, and then they made videos. And this is just a clip from one of them. Ardilla has very tiny particles, and they stick together. You made things out of clay. Ta-da! So you get the idea. It's not the video I would make, but it was. I have like 2 of them so far, and they're going to send me some more. They're all different, and we also had guests come in, like a philosopher came in and spoke to the students, and then they incorporated those ideas into the performance. Okay. Now you can see the inside of my head. Okay, I want to talk about the Anthropocene. This is a great painting by Goya, which is used in a book by Michael Serre. And the point Michael Serre makes about it is we have these two people fighting in a landscape, but at the same time they're sinking in quicksand. And the idea is that there's really three players here. There's the two humans fighting, and then there's what's happening in the landscape. And this is kind of a kind of beautiful rendition of how we have to start thinking, that there's not just humans, there's also everything else. So you know what the Anthropocene is, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because I want us to be on the same page. It's a new geological period, an epoch, marked by human-caused global ecological change that pushes Earth systems beyond the stable state under which human civilization emerged, which was the Holocene. Now, the Anthropocene is, you may know, is very controversial as a name and even as a concept. There are other names that are being suggested for it. The Capitalocene, which would be pointing the finger at capitalism, saying it's not all the humans in the world that got us in this mess, it's capitalism. There's also the Plantationocene, which is to bring in the logics of colonialism, in which this way of thinking about it says that our real problem started in around 1492. The Extractocene, self-explanatory. The Chulocene, which is Donna Haraway's contribution. I'm not going to get into that. It's kind of complicated. The Eremocene, which E.O. Wilson, the biologist, has suggested as the age of loneliness, because we are living in the sixth great extinction in the history of the world, and we have caused it. So the Anthropocene, I'm using that term partly because I'm in dialogue with scientists right now, with geologists, and that's the discourse I'm in. But I understand the detractors, and it's just a shorthand for all of these things I've listed, okay? The increase in erosion and sediment transport, that you know, we've moved more earth than all the rivers combined. Perturbations of cycles of elements such as carbon, nitrogen, all that synthetic nitrogen has played havoc with the earth systems. And then, of course, you know about carbon dioxide. Global warming, sea level rise, ocean acidification, dead zones, extinction, and new minerals, including concrete, fly ash, and plastics. Because now you probably know, but I'm going to tell you anyway, that we all have plastic in our bodies. All living things have microplastics. Because plastics on their way, you know, they live forever, but mostly they live forever as little tiny microns, little tiny particles of plastic, because they do break down over time. This is a really interesting kind of schema for getting a perspective on this. It's called the Keeling Curve, and what you're looking at along the bottom is thousands of years ago, okay? So we're starting at 10,000 years ago. This is the Holocene. And you see all the fluctuations that are in the natural cycle. And then you see about 500 years ago, there's a little dip, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then it skyrockets. And so the top of that line is where we are now, in in terms of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, parts per million. And this one will give you an even bigger perspective. This is charting fluctuations in the atmosphere and CO2 levels for the past 420,000 years. So you see all these fluctuations, and a lot of those dips are ice ages, because when there's less carbon in the atmosphere, we have ice ages. And that there are natural cycles of this. But as you can see here, it's so much higher than it's been for 420,000 years. So there's no denying, even the climate change deniers have to say, yes, it's happening. What they're denying is that we're causing it. So the Anthropocene is actually this kind of technical thing. The International Commission on Stratigraphy, which is part of the International Union of Geological Sciences, established an Anthropocene working group to determine where exactly it started. Where did the Anthropocene start? And that they call the beginning of a new epoch, of any epoch in the geological record, they call it the global boundary stratotype section and point, and the GSSP, which they also call the golden spike. And they really do put a golden spike somewhere in the world to indicate, oh, this is where the Pleistocene started, this is where the Holocene started, etc. And here's a map of all the ratified GSSPs, and I'm not sure. I mean, I'm still just looking into the science of it, but it looks like most of the research is in Europe, right? And this is exactly what people are talking about when they complain that the Anthropocene, its very concept, is colonial. And it comes out of the science that has been in the service of colonial interests and capitalist interest. And also, it's universalizing, which separates people from the earth. When you universalize, you're abstracting. So these are my notes. I got to sit in on the last meeting of the Anthropocene Working Group, was in New Orleans in November. It was their 5th meeting, and what their task is to look at all these points in history and see where might be the beginning of the Anthropocene. So we have, these are some of the proposals, was 13,000 years ago, Pleistocene megafaunal predation by humans, 11,000 to 7,000 years, significant human niche construction, 1610, the Orbis spike. Okay, this has been suggested by Lewis and Maslin, that what happened was in 1610, this is so horrible, when the Europeans came to North and South America, they killed off so many humans, 54 million, that there was a reforestation, because the people living here had been practicing agriculture and burning of forests. And there was reforestation, and there was a spike in oxygen. So there was like a mini ice age. And this has been proposed. Then the mid-20th century, great acceleration after post-World War II. And then the nuclear bombs, right? Now, why is this important? It's politically important because because we're talking about human history. We're not just talking about natural history. We're talking about the actions of humans. So where you say that thing started indicates, like, is it all humans? Is it all the humans on Earth that have contributed to this ecological degradation, or is it just some of us? I was going to play a video, but I'm not. So my latest thing is I'm talking to scientists about, I want to know, how does change happen? That's my basic curiosity right now. And so I'm talking to scientists about, what does the Anthropocene suggest needs to change about the way we do science? Okay, now I'm going to show you some more art. And in some of this work, I'm talking about the artist as the organ, the society's organ to sense what is actually happening. Okay, so this piece started when I learned that in South Chicago, people in the neighborhoods down there, that's where all the industry and dirty stuff is. And there are also people living there. And people in the neighborhoods there were finding this black dust all over their yards, their houses. It was coming in their windows. It was in their children's noses. And it turned out that there were these piles of petroleum coke along the Chicago River, waiting to be, they were coming from the refineries of petroleum. It's a byproduct. And they were just piling it there, and it was blowing into people's neighborhoods. And the people protested, and they did get it moved. Of course, the question is, where did it go? Meanwhile, I was really interested in this as a material. So you can see that it's very securitized. But I went down there on a Sunday morning with a bucket and found a hole in the fence. And I got a bucket of pet coke. So then I made a piece with it, okay? Meanwhile, for the last 3 years, I had been collecting these little bird cages that are the kind that miners would take into the mines with the canary in them. You all know about the canary in the coal mine, right? So I'd been waiting to see what I was going to do with these bird cages, because I just thought they had a poetic presence. So I made this piece called For the Body Without Organs to Sense. And this is what it looked like. It was a little constellation of bird cages. And then I wanted to put something inside the bird cages, and I wanted to make something out of pet coke. So what did I do? I cast human breasts out of pet coke. And at first I didn't know why I did that, but I kept thinking about it. And, you know, it's almost like petroleum is like our mother's milk. I mean, it's like we are so invested in it. It's part of our entire lives. And also, the reproductive organs are the most sensitive, and that's where cancers are rising fastest. Anyway, human breasts. But in one cage, I had my canary, Delirio, who was singing throughout the show. He was well taken care of by a team of students who fought to get to feed him and bathe him, etc. So in the constellation, you had one living thing. And if you want to talk about, if you're objecting to birds being in cages, we can talk about that. But there he is. Now, it's more about that. I'm going to talk about another piece. And I was really interested in this idea of the Gwich'in Caribou people in Canada. And one of the things they say about themselves is, I am the caribou. They identify with the important aspects of their landscape. And I'm thinking, well, what am I? I am petroleum. We are the petroleum people. And these are pictures of little microfossils, because that's what we're burning. So I was also feeling very sad about extinction and about the state of the environment that we live in. And so I wanted to make a library of tears. And I worked with the glass blower, and I made all these tear shapes. And in the glass ones, there are byproducts and products of the petroleum industry. So we have, and of this extraction in general. So we have like sulfur, pet coke, sweet crude oil, aluminum, cadmium, ammonia. Here it is. It was a 29-foot wall of these objects. Oops, 2 slides. Which one's better? Here's a key I made so you can actually find out what is in each of these. But I also made some of them out of things like feathers and fur and leaves and hair, because I wanted to indicate what kind of bargain are we making? What are we trading in for our dependency, our appetite for petroleum? And since it was a library, I was inspired by this house of Menandro in Pompeii with this very beautiful painting. That's where the yellow comes from. And I got my niece, Alex Farron. It's hard to see. I wanted it to not really compete too much, but she made a wallpaper, and it has drops and craters and microfossils and a man reading. Okay, another project. We're almost done. I was invited to be the Artisan Residency at the Garfield Park Conservatory in Chicago, which is a beautiful space. And I spent a lot of time there, months. And what really struck me, besides how beautiful it was and how am I going to add anything to this, because it's already such a splendid environment, but every single plant had a label. And I was thinking a lot about what a colonial project a conservatory like this is, and even the Linnaean naming system, which eradicates localities and more vernacular names of plants. And I was thinking, what happens to the things that can't be classified, right? What happens to the sense of place or the spirit of place when places have been raided for whatever somebody considered their treasures? So I made a piece called The Persistence of the Unsorted. And it really started with a vision, where I just had this vision of this palm house with a canoe floating in the ceiling, way up in the palms. And in the canoe, I made all these kind of hybrid creatures that would stand in for the things that can't be categorized. And these are some of the creatures as they evolved in my studio. Birch bark head. That head is made of a wasp nest. That head is made of a turtle shell. That kooky-looking head is a cactus wren's nest. And then we installed it, and it was there for 5 months, just floating above the reflecting pool. And then we had a few in the rafters. And what one reviewer pointed out was just how very queer it was. Because the queer are the things that can't be categorized, right? So I think I'm running out of time, and I didn't even look for my timekeeper. Can somebody give me a time? It's 5 of 6.
Almost 7 minutes past 6.
Past? Okay, so I think I'll stop there. I don't know, I have a lot more, but I think that's enough. And because I want time for some questions. I had prepared for a longer talk, but I never get it that it's supposed to be 45 minutes. I'm sorry, I just never get it. So if we have any questions?
But I just wanted to, like, the dog in your thing.
It's for the,
Oh,
for the recording.
Oh, for the recording, yes, right.
Good.
Those figures, I mean, those things you made in that garden there. The dog one, I mean, how did you make that one that looks so real? The one with the dog on the guy's shoulder, like,
That is a,
It is-
that I,
well, that's what looks
Yeah.
like a fox,
it's
right?
a coyote.
Or I mean a coyote, right?
Yeah,
But
so
the-
I actually used taxidermy.
All right, so the one further, you went past it, it's further. There was a dog. There. Or a bear, I don't know.
It's a
'cause got
bear.
It's okay, because it had a thing on its head, I couldn't really see it long enough to say, okay, so
It's a
that,
bear.
all right, so that's another taxidermy.
Taxidermy.
Okay, because,
Yes,
oh my gosh, that's
on
amazing.
eBay, you can buy anything. I even bought, for the Library of Tears, I even bought tar sands. You know the tar sands up in Canada? It's like the biggest ecological disaster ever, where they've cut down all the forest, and they're just raking the earth to get this tar, this petroleum product, that's all embedded in the sand, and it's a really messy refining process. And so you can get tar sands in little jars on the internet. Yep. There's someone.
Hi. I'm really fascinated by artists who are deep researchers. And I'm curious, after listening to you and listening to how you go into these meetings about the Anthropocene with people from all over the world that are trying to figure out these questions, how do you get into those meetings? How do you feel about being in those meetings? Why do you want to be in those meetings, and do you need those meetings to make the work that you're making? I'm curious about your role and the way you feel and the people feel around you when you're doing this sort of deep, intensive, interactive research.
Are you an artist?
I work with a lot of artists.
Okay, just curious. Well, it's a long process, usually, to get to be somewhere like that. It started when I participated in the Anthropocene campus in Berlin that was sponsored by the HKW, the House of World Cultures, and the Max Planck Institute. I proposed with my colleagues a seminar for that Anthropocene campus, and we were accepted, so we gave a day-and-a-half long seminar. The Anthropocene Working Group is from these researchers and scholars from all these different universities around the world, but mostly England and Europe. And they don't have funding. So the director of HKW, which is a cultural institution in Berlin, went to the German government and raised euros, for their meetings so that they could have these meetings and do this work. And why is the cultural institution interested in it? Well, one of the reasons I'm interested in it, which is to be part of a developing discourse as it develops and think about what does it mean for culture? Like, how does culture have to change in response to what this just cataclysmic thing that is happening, that we are living through, which is unprecedented to us. Now, one of the arguments with the term Anthropocene from indigenous scholars is, oh, this is nothing new. We've lived through the end of the world many times. Many worlds have been ended through dispossession, invasion, genocide, etc. So it's really important to note that. And how do I feel when I'm there? I'm just very curious. I think most people are very curious, but most school systems wreck our curiosity, make learning seem like it's boring or a performance, test. And so I'm really into getting in touch with that really native curiosity, and I feel privileged. I mean, I feel like I'm really lucky to sit in on these conversations that I through my own weird practice, have gotten into, but not by being a scientist. And I actually believe that we need to infiltrate these specializations to ask questions that are not being asked at the right time in the process. I mean, usually like bioethics, it happens after the fact, right? It's an afterthought. We need to have like citizen review panels that say, what questions are worth asking? Is this research, who's it gonna benefit? What's it for? So that's a long answer, but you had many questions. Is that, okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. Do we have any more? Sure.
At one point, you showed these towers that were growing.
Yeah.
Could you just go into a little bit more detail about that? Because I didn't understand how they work.
Oh, okay, they're really simple and really cheap, okay? You just get fencing and make a cylinder, and you can reinforce it with a couple of 2x4s. You can weight it at the bottom. Then you line it with like a weed cloth or a burlap. You line it, and then you fill it with soil. Good mix of compost and soil. We've done some experiments for how to keep it from compacting, putting in some different kinds of rocks for drainage. And then you just you get your seedlings started, okay? Then you tear little holes in the cloth and insert your seedlings. They take root, and they grow. And you can have different kinds of watering systems, just with the hose and a soaker. You know, it's really easy and cheap. That's the whole idea. And this guy, Ben Fratton, that I collaborated with, is setting them up in Nairobi.
And in Syria, I was just seeing that on the news, that they're actually, those huge camps where all the displaced people and are doing exactly that, because there's no other way to get food.
Well, exactly. And in fact, you know, people do this kind of thing. It doesn't take an artist who went to art school to come up with this stuff. I mean, people get like old seed bags, fill them with dirt, and put them out on the sidewalks, you know, or wherever they can to grow food, because it's essential.
We have time for one more question.
She had her hand up.
I was just wondering if you could talk more about the way that you, as a research-based artist, grapple with form, and if materials are something you consider as you begin your research, or if it's sort of something you're led to. Like, do they inspire your work, or are you led to the materials you use?
Well, it's really a combination of those things, you know? Like, if I start researching things, I have my antenna out for what kind of materials are involved in this. What's the material side of a given discourse, right? So something like pet coke, right? I mean, so I was really interested in the material itself and confronting that material and inviting it to be part of the perception that I'm inviting other people to share with me. Or something like petroleum. It's like, that's a natural that if I'm thinking about the degree to which we are dependent on petroleum, I mean, you know, everything in this room practically is here because of petroleum, then, or coal, but, you know, fossil fuels. Then it's just like, well, you know, I was thinking about tears because they are a part of the body that also has to do with emotions. That's beyond the rational, right? And I was thinking about now even our tears are not going to purify us. Like, I was feeling like, okay, I can be really sad. There's a lot of grief involved in this work, but you can't stop there. I can't just go around being sad, you know, even though I cry at my presentations. And but it's like the two things develop together, right? And are you an artist? Mm-hmm. Good. So you probably have a feel for for various kinds of materials. And as you are curious and you feed your curiosity and you research these things and put them together with your interests, you'll come up with forms. Good luck. Oh, I'm just going to show one more thing. I promise this is the end, which is just that I just wanted to say, last year I was very frustrated about all this, so I wrote a young adult novel with my sister about climate change. And you can buy it on Lulu. I don't make a profit. It just costs like under $5. But it's a good ride. And also, if you send me your address, I'll send you one. If you don't have $5 and you don't want to mess with Lulu, you can mess with me. And I'm really easy to find on the internet. Just email me and give me your address, and I will send you a book. It's a good read. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Claire.